Hello YouTube and welcome to another GV anime review, where today I'll be reviewing the anime Heavy Object, which was a 24 episode mech anime made by GC Stuff. When I watch something from GC Stuff, it's usually a rom-com, so this was something new for me. So let's find out if they did well. The story of Heavy Object takes place in the not too distant future, where wars are no longer fought by soldiers, but by gigantic war machines called objects. On a military base in Alaska, we meet Quenser Barbatich, an engineering student who studies objects. We also meet his friend Hevia Winchell and Melinda Brantini, who is the controller of the local object called Baby Magnum. Now, one day the base gets unexpectedly attacked by a foreign object, and Quenser, Hevia and Melinda will have to give it their all to survive and defeat the enemy object. Let's start with a word about the animation. Now, the animation is something that I will discuss in both the positive and the negative section of this review. The positive side can be found in the animation of the landscapes and the objects themselves. I must say that was decently done, especially for an animation studio that, for as far as I know, has little experience with mech animes. GC Stuff usually does rom-com animes, or at least something that can be described as a slice of life. But here the animation of the objects was definitely not of a level that made me cringe, in contrast to some other things which I will get back to later on. The opening and ending songs of Heavy Object were definitely to my liking. The two opening songs, One More Chance and Never Give Up, always hyped me up for the episode that was to come. These two songs emphasized the action part of the anime, which lay in the war theme. This was in contrast to the two ending songs, Dear Brave and Kawaranai Tsuyosa, which focused more on the softer side of the anime. And with that softer side, I can get to my next point, which was the romance. As I just said, the two ending songs concentrated on the romance in this anime, being the relationship between Quenser and Melinda, a relationship that I definitely ship. The softness of their romance was a welcome diversion from all the war violence and complicated politics that we got in Heavy Object. Not that it was the main point of this anime, but it being in the background made that this anime could exploit another facet of anime, and a facet that GC Stuff's very good at. I was then also pleased with the conclusion of the romance in the final episode, because animes like this dare to leave us with kind of an open ending when it comes to romance. But Heavy Object gave me a satisfying ending to the relationship between Quenser and Melinda. This romance was also the source of many of Quenser's actions and his determination, and that's what made me like him as a character. He was a pusher. Every time he and Hevia were faced with a problem, his determination and coupled with that his love for Melinda made Quenser push further to find a solution. Especially in the final episodes where we get to the romantic climax of Heavy Object, you could see that Quenser would go through rocks in order to save Melinda. Now, by everything that I told here, it almost seems that Heavy Object is a pinky, flowery anime, but don't be misguided. This is still an anime that centers around war, and Heavy Object did not idolize the war concept. No, it took it very seriously, and people actually die in this anime. Not something that you would expect when you first watch it, but Heavy Object has it all. Death, lies, betrayal. Heavy Object did not take the war concept and put a big pink ribbon around it. It kept it very realistically, and that contrast between violent war, sweet romantic moments and silly comedy made it a very balanced anime. Now, my first positive point was the animation of the landscapes and the objects. Unfortunately, there were also some other things that were animated way less sharp. Where this struck me the most was in the animation of the water. Oh, that water was so poorly animated that it was hard to look at. Especially in the second arc, which takes place completely on water, it was just such a pain to watch at. Maybe this is where we see that Heavy Object probably wasn't a high budget anime, because that water animation was just plain atrocious. Next negative point is that this anime sometimes was very difficult to follow. Not when it came to the fights between the different objects, those were usually pretty straightforward. But when it came to the politics that lied beneath the battles, that was really difficult to follow. Until today, I still don't fully understand who's affiliated with who in this anime. I know that there are 4 factions, but which objects belong to which faction and on what the diplomatic relationships between the factions are, I'm left completely clueless. The politics in this anime could have definitely been explained better. And my last negative point is the comedy. In particular the comedy in the first part of the anime. Such lame, fan service based comedy is really not my favorite kind of comedy. In an anime that revolves around warfare, you really don't have to put fan service comedy into it to improve it. It just doesn't work, and it was a real bother to me in the first part of Heavy Object. However, I must say that the comedy did improve the further we went into the anime. There were still some moments that made me ask why, but overall the level of lame comedy definitely dropped in the latter part of Heavy Object, which I can only appreciate. So as a conclusion, Heavy Object was one of those animes that started out very mediocre, with a mildly interesting storyline and lame comedy, but improved along the way. It developed into an anime that did the mech genre right, and that didn't idolize the concept of war. And that's why I'm going to rate Heavy Object at 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's not the greatest anime I've seen over the past 6 months, but it was something fun to follow. So if you're a fan of the mech genre, you really can give Heavy Object a try. Now I have little to no experience when it comes to mech animes, so I'm not in a position to give a solid recommendation here. I suggest searching for animes with a mech tag onto them if you want to watch more animes like Heavy Object. And with that I conclude my review of Heavy Object. As usual, you can find a full list of all my animes and reviews over at Anime Planet. As usual, I will put a link in the description box down below. Now if you want me to review particular anime from this list, please put them in the comments. Also, if you have a recommendation for me, put them in the comments as well. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, visit me on Facebook and subscribe to this channel for more reviews in the future. I will say arigatou gozaimasu and I will see you all in the next video.